Jacksonville Jaguars are next. And we're in an interesting spot here where maybe the pre-record almost it feels like breaking news to us, and it's week-old news for everyone else. But they've finally announced their new general manager as of right now while we're recording this thing. James Gladstone comes over from I almost said St. Louis, from the Los Angeles Rams. So the GM spot has been filled. They have Liam Cohen coming in as the head coach. Gladstone coming from the Rams. There's a connection there with Liam Cohen. So this is an interesting one, right? Because friends of McVay now is it becoming friends of Les, and we have some Rams tentacles sneaking around the NFL here. And we know if there's one thing the Rams do is they do things differently. And they're bobbing when everyone else is weaving, whether it's never having first round picks or whatever it might be. So I think it's an interesting hire for Jacksonville, and they're not in a terrible place. You have Trevor Lawrence, you have stuff to build around, but it's pretty pivotal time, I think, for the Jags as they're trying to rebuild this roster.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they make a change at head coach. Liam Cohen's the guy coming in there. The big sort of decision, though, I think for them is they finally made that call and got rid of Trent Baalke, who had been the guy clutching all the power for a few years there, and obviously had a very clear way of doing things when it came to personnel moves and talent acquisition, and like he is chasing freak athletes above all else, right? And that's how you end up with a draft pick like Trayvon Walker. Now you're going to go in a different direction. And, you start to look at this team and like, it's not a bad roster top to bottom. Like this is a team that has underachieved. And part of the reason for that is that, the talent is better than than the results that it's been producing. So this is a team where I think there are some teams where the new situation, like, all right, this is going to take a while, right? This is not a good in 2025 deal. This is maybe a good in 2026 deal. The Jags could be good this year. Like this could be turned around fast.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to last year, I struggled pegging what the Jags were going to be because the previous year, don't forget, in 2023, they were the number one seed late into the season. They were 8-3. They were competing for the number one seed. Then they collapsed. And the on-field product, or at least the depth chart, and they were pretty good, a pretty good team. And then they overhauled a big chunk of the roster, and then brought it back with like a mishmash of veterans who, on paper, were kind of like similar players. Like it felt like a whole bunch of lateral type moves on both sides of the ball with some of their additions. Gabe Davis came in, and Darnell Savage, and it was just a whole bunch of lateral moves. And it's like I don't know how all these things are going to fit. And then the pieces just didn't fit all that great, and they didn't have a good season. They struggled defensively and inconsistent offensively, and everything was off. But again, it's like if it's a similar group of players right now that doesn't look awful, and sometimes with just a different coach, different coaching staff, different system, it could all work. So I don't hate the Jags. I don't think this is like a complete teardown. I want to see, they need better depth on the defensive side of the ball. There's ways they could upgrade the offensive line, but they brought in a Brian Thomas Jr., who looks like an absolute difference maker. And then to me, it all comes down to Liam Cohen getting the most out of Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the kind of draft pick that can absolutely transform everything about this offense. I mean, and the thing is, not only I didn't love Brian Thomas Jr. as a draft prospect, and it looks like I got that horrifically wrong. But one of the reasons that I didn't love it was because they kind of needed him to be that player if this offense was going to do anything, because they didn't have those difference makers anywhere else. Well, forget it. Like he looks like that guy. He looks like somebody that can have a Jamar Chase kind of impact on an offense, where you look at him and say he's going to change the overall results we're getting, not just from the quarterback, but from everybody else, like from all the receivers that now have way more room to work in because we got to dedicate extra attention towards Brian Thomas Jr. I don't think that there's anything he can't do within that offense. So that has the potential to be an absolute home run draft pick that can change everything. And now you're pairing him, with a guy like Liam Cohen, who's, running an offense that should maximize what Trevor Lawrence is able to produce. He could be the thing that this offense is built around.
Yeah, we thought going into the season, maybe Brian Thomas Jr., he'll make his money as just a deep threat. As you said, he showed he could do it all. But if he was just a deep threat and Gabe Davis was a bit of a deep threat, it felt like this was going to be this aggressive downfield passing attack, which it was. But now we're sitting here, okay, Brian Thomas is a pretty true number one here. Gabe Davis can settle in as the deep threat. Christian Kirk's probably going to get cut, maybe cut by the time you're listening to this. This does feel like a need. And I'm not saying we're going to do it at number 5 overall, but Tetero and McMillan discussions probably should be had. It would be a fascinating combination to have Trevor Lawrence throwing to the big-bodied McMillan and Brian Thomas Jr. If they could get a trade down opportunity, I think that would be a great way to maybe spend night one if you're the Jags. If not, I'm all in on Mason Graham maybe being the guy here for the Jags at 5 with the defensive line depth and pieces that they need, and certainly interior pass rush that they need.
Yeah, given where they're picking and given that we expect 2 quarterbacks probably to go out of the first 4 picks before Jacksonville come up, I'm pretty interested in staying in that number 5 draft spot and getting, the best player available, which is probably going to fill an area of relative need. And it's been Mason Graham in a lot of mock drafts that I've seen. I mean, I would love that as a fit. I think Mason Graham is this absolute game wrecker at defensive tackle. Incredibly strong, incredibly fast. The guy's got a wrestling background. You can see that in his tape, the way he just tosses linemen to the side sometimes. Mason Graham comes into this team and you pair him with, Josh Hines Allen, who is a top-tier pass rusher, then you've got something to work with.
If we go that route, I love Mason Graham. Violent block shedder. Love him for the Jags at 5. Later in the draft, I do want to look at receivers, like finding a good route running complement to Brian Thomas Jr. I know I've talked a little bit about Jalen Royals before, big body of Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, Isaiah Bond. I mean, there's a plethora of those types of receivers that I think would be really nice fits and complements to both Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., especially if Christian Kirk ends up out in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should definitely be targeting receiver with, so this is another thing. They've got a lot of draft picks to play with as well. Yeah. They picked 10 times, I think. Okay, a lot of them are late on, but they've got 2 third-rounders because of the Cam Robinson trade to Minnesota last year.
Five in the top 105 is what they have. Yeah. It's pretty good. Pretty good spot.
A third-round draft pick on a wide receiver would make a ton of sense.
So I like that, right? We're going to help the defensive line with Graham. We'll get some receivers in there. The O-line, again, interesting because they brought in Mitch Morse last year. They haven't had a ton of starting spots available the last couple of years. A pretty seamless transition with Walker Little going in and filling in for Cam Robinson. He did look good. Remember Mike Renner way back loved him as a developmental left tackle, and Walker Little finally, coming good on that, looking like the future left tackle there, and they just locked him up. I still want to maybe add some pieces. Antoine Harrison getting a little bit better as the former first rounder, starting right tackle. They do need a right guard with Brandon Scherf hitting free agency, so they could use some depth and, potential upside options on the offensive line.
Yeah. Again, I think second round might make sense to try and grab a starting offensive lineman. Like if their first 4 picks, first 3 rounds were Mason Graham in the first round, potential starting right guard in the second round, wide receiver in the third round somewhere, and then whatever else your best player available is with that other third round pick, maybe some kind of secondary depth somewhere. That's pretty good day 1 and 2.
Their second round pick at pick 36 is intriguing for the corners that I keep saying, could fall. I don't know if 36 is too far for them to fall, but everybody that I said, Buffalo could look at in the first round, those cornerback needy teams, could one of those good corners fall to 36? Could have Mason Graham at 5, really good corner at 36. You're talking about 2 first round caliber players maybe with your first 2 picks.
I think corner is so scheme specific, scheme dependent, and the boards are all over the place that every year we go into this with Cooper DeJean, consensus first round guy, Kool-Aid McKinstry, consensus first round guy that end up falling into the second round because there is no consensus when it comes to cornerback rankings. Because if your scheme is Gus Bradley's, like we talked about it, the difference between Bradley's scheme and Anarumo's scheme, they want totally different corners. Their boards look nothing alike at the same position, let alone, it's hard enough to get people to agree on the same position if they want the same things, let alone if they want completely different things. So I think corner is the one position where it is like it's very realistic to sort of project random players to slide into the second round that you think are consensus first round guys. I think that's less true with some other positions where everyone is pretty much looking for the same thing.
If we're trying to predict what the Jags do from a strategic standpoint, again, James Gladstone comes in as the general manager. He's only 34 years old, but he's been with the Rams for the last 8 years, director of scouting strategy. If we were to define the Rams scouting strategy, they've always drafted in volume. He steps into a situation where the Jags already have their picks. They've drafted in high volume. They had that spurt where they never picked in the first round and they traded for players. I don't know if that's not like the strategy that the Rams always employ, right? They've come back from that. But you do come out of a lot of Rams drafts where it's like, oh, that's a unique group of players, right? I wasn't expecting them to draft, or certain players to go this high or whatever it is. So I am intrigued by that. Not so much reaches or anything, but their own style. We know the Rams have used a lot of on-field athleticism before some other teams were using it. So that I'm intrigued by that as far as the Jags and seeing Les Snead and the Rams, again, their system, so to speak, their scouting system maybe spreading across the league a little bit.
I mean, not just that, but with this whole run of like no early picks and all those late round picks, like they came out of every draft with a couple of players from those late rounds, which is a terrible strike rate generally, that are big parts of that team. I mean, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, not just like solid, guys chewing up snaps, but like legitimate impact players that they got in the 5th round, in the 6th round, guys like that. So if 10 picks here in Jacksonville, if they can tick out, that's why, again, I'm not sure I'd be in a rush to trade down. Like if you can get a blue chip superstar and make Mason Graham with pick number 5 and, your new GM can come in and work a little bit of magic and pick up a couple of guys in the lower rounds that can make useful contributions. Now you've already had a good draft, regardless of what you did in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Yeah, and look, I don't know how good of a job Gladstone's going to do, but for an offseason where the Jags looked like they fumbled the whole thing, right? They fumbled the coaching search and they fired Trent Baalke way later than everybody expected. Might end up being a pretty good outcome. Getting Liam Cohen, who was it looks like one of the better young offensive minds in the NFL. You have him paired with Trevor Lawrence. You have the Rams, front office coming in to reshape things in where the front office had been, a little hit or miss over the last few years, to say the least. So I don't think it's that far off for the Jags, especially if they get Trevor Lawrence on track here.
And that's a big sort of question that hangs over all of this, right? Is what can Liam Cohen get out of Trevor Lawrence? I think his trajectory, his potential, what he actually is a lot more up in the air than it's been previously. Like, what is his ceiling actually? I think Liam Cohen is a great person to get an answer to that question. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.